On April 28th, no one could have predicted that Ukraine would experience one of its darkest moments in its long-running war with Russia. After 3 years of relentless fighting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky finally had the chance to meet with US President Donald Trump in the Oval Office, hoping to gain strong American support in this life-or-death struggle. However, instead of being welcomed as an ally, Zelensky was met with cold indifference. What began as a meeting filled with hope quickly descended into chaos. Instead of discussing strategies for support, the conversation soon turned into a heated argument. The outcome? Trump demanded that Zelensky leave the White House immediately, even canceling the planned lunch. So, why did America turn its back on Ukraine? The reason didn't lie with Zelensky or Ukraine itself, but with Trump. The US president simply didn't trust that continuing military aid to Ukraine was worth it. Trump had long questioned whether America should continue pouring resources into an endless war in Europe, and things only got worse after that. Trump didn't just push Ukraine aside. He started looking for ways to cozy up to Moscow. He began to bond with Russian President Vladimir Putin, even considering drafting a peace plan that included major concessions to Moscow, which made Ukraine's allies nervous and uneasy. At that moment, no one could have predicted what would happen next. The signs of this shift only made the situation more complicated and unstable. After the tense meeting between Zelensky and Trump, no one believed things would change. Yet, just 1 day later, Trump's administration surprised the world by announcing that the US and Ukraine had just signed a new economic agreement. And this wasn't just any agreement. It involved sharing profits from Ukraine's strategic mineral extraction. It seemed as though Trump had turned his back on Ukraine, but then extended a hand, offering them a new opportunity filled with calculated moves. The question that arose was, why this dramatic shift? Experts believed that this agreement could be a glimmer of hope for Ukraine, offering them a brighter future in their ongoing battle with Russia. But the real question remained, was this a permanent strategic shift for Trump, or just another temporary move in his unpredictable foreign policy? But the surprises didn't stop there. A few weeks later, another unexpected turn occurred. The meeting between Trump and Zelensky at the Vatican seemed to send a new signal, a much friendlier and less tense meeting than anyone had anticipated. People began to wonder if Trump was changing his attitude toward Ukraine. Had he grown tired of Putin's demands and realized that Ukraine still needed American support? Here's the catch. Trump was known for his flip-flopping decisions. Today, he could be conciliatory, but who knows what tomorrow will bring. So, despite the signs of reconciliation, no one could say for sure whether this relationship would last. The story continues to pull people into its whirlwind of surprises and sudden shifts, a narrative that only Trump could create. From the very beginning, Trump left the world scratching its head when he blamed Zelensky, claiming that it was the Ukrainian president's fault for letting the war drag on. But before anyone could process that, Trump did a complete 180. Suddenly shifting his focus to Putin for the bloody missile attacks on Ukrainian civilians. No one really knew what Trump was after. One day he was pointing fingers, and the next he was defending people. Even within his own team, from Steve W.C.O. to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, opinions were split on the stance toward Russia and Ukraine. Each person had their own voice, but no one was really listening to each other, leaving the world to wait and see what would happen next. During his campaign, Trump boldly claimed that he could end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours. His promise made waves, with many people skeptical, unsure if it was even possible, but reality turned out to be different. After over 100 days in his second term, Trump still hadn't come up with any ceasefire agreements. Things remained at a standstill, and his so-called swift solution seemed more like a slogan than a strategy. According to Elena Poyova, an expert closely following the situation, Trump was growing increasingly impatient with the slow pace of negotiations. A man who wanted fast results, he couldn't hide his frustration, as everything seemed to unravel and grow more tangled. Putin, who Trump had once respected, was now the source of his frustration. Trump began to realize that if he kept waiting for Russia to take the lead and end the war, he might have to wait until the end of his term. All of this placed Trump in a tough spot. Continue to backtrack on his promises, or find a way to turn the situation around and keep up his image as the world's savior, a role he had proudly claimed. The relationship between the US and Ukraine, which seemed stuck in a deadlock, suddenly took a sharp turn. But it's hard to say if this is the beginning of a major shift or just small embers waiting to ignite into something bigger. The day after the mining agreement between the US and Ukraine was announced, Trump unexpectedly flipped again, criticizing Putin for missile attacks on Ukrainian neighborhoods. This was shocking, especially since just a few days prior, Trump had been trying to maintain a friendly relationship with Putin. It's confusing, isn't it? A hot new economic deal was signed, yet suddenly, a wave of criticism erupted against Moscow, without any prior warning. It's clear that America has changed its view on this war, but the true motivation behind this shift remains a big question mark. At the same time, Trump and Zelensky met in the Vatican, where everything seemed much more peaceful. Gone were the public insults and tensions from before, replaced with handshakes and smiles. But don't be fooled by the friendly images. The handshake between Trump and Zelensky, though warm, didn't come with any concrete commitments for the future. Both sides kept silent on key issues, making many wonder whether this was just a diplomatic performance or the beginning of a stronger alliance. With Trump, everything can change in a moment. The relationship between the US and Ukraine could continue to evolve. But is this the thawing of a cold relationship, or just a tiny flame smoldering before a big storm? We'll just have to wait and see. The story began on April 30, 2025, a day that was supposed to mark a turning point in US-Ukraine relations, but instead raised more questions than answers. With tensions still running high, the two sides unexpectedly shook hands on a mining agreement that the media quickly dubbed the billion-dollar deal. At the heart of the agreement was the US-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, sounding like a regular investment fund, but in reality, it was a partnership with a set of complicated rules and conditions. The US sent its International Development Finance Corporation to represent them, while Ukraine was involved through a public agency supporting public permanent partnerships. The two sides joined forces, but the question remained, was it really an equal partnership? What shocked many was the extremely favorable terms for the US. Washington didn't just commit to sending military aid and technology, they also secured priority access to Ukraine's strategic resources, ranging from oil to rare metals. And here's the kicker. The profits from this deal would be completely tax-free in both countries. A tax-free deal might sound appealing, but could Ukraine be gradually losing control of its precious resources? Just hours after the deal was announced, the Ukrainian parliament erupted in outrage. Lawmakers were furious that the public document only outlined the general framework. There were no details about long-term obligations or safeguards for national interests. Many feared that Ukraine was being pushed into signing a deal they didn't fully understand, with consequences that could haunt them in the long run. Now, a wave of criticism was sweeping across not only the political sphere, but also among ordinary citizens. Was this a strategic move to keep Ukraine relevant on the geopolitical map? Or the beginning of trading resources for survival in the ongoing war? The answer is still unfolding. What do you think? As the public was still trying to figure out what was going on with a billion-dollar mining deal between the US and Ukraine, a real political storm broke out in Kiev. This time, the storm centered on President Zelensky. After the vague terms of the agreement were revealed, lawmakers Irina Gerashenko couldn't hold their anger any longer. They spoke out fiercely to the media, accusing Zelensky's administration of doing big things in the dark, with no transparency to the parliament or, more importantly, to the people of Ukraine. "We're not puppets to be controlled by shady economic deals," one of the lawmakers boldly declared. No one had seen the detailed document, no one had been consulted. So who gave the president the authority to sign a deal that could determine the fate of the country's resources? The situation became even more heated when experts discovered something troubling. The deal didn't include any clauses guaranteeing military support from the US. In other words, Ukraine might be handing over the keys to its mineral wealth to Washington, but all they would get in return was hope. With the war still raging on and no clear security guarantee in sight, many began questioning. Was Zelensky gambling with the future of the nation in an economic bet with no defense cards? Kiev's political scene had never been calm, but this time, it seemed like a true earthquake. And the people of Ukraine were waiting for a clear answer. Are they benefiting from this, or are they being left to fend for themselves on the front lines? As the war still rages on, Ukraine finds itself facing a new crossroads. One that could either be the light at the end of the tunnel or the headlights of an oncoming train. The mining deal with the US seems enticing at first glance. billions in investments, advanced technology, and the opportunity to bring the country's national resources to the global stage. It's clearly a massive economic boost for a nation exhausted by years of conflict. But hold on before celebrating. A closer look at the terms reveals something chilling. Not a single line mentions security guarantees for Ukraine. No weapons, no defense systems, no promises of standing by Ukraine if the war escalates. And that's when the big question emerges. Is Ukraine seizing an opportunity, or are they gambling the fate of the nation on a deal with no exit plan? Does Trump truly want to help Ukraine, or is this agreement simply a pawn in his geopolitical game with Russia? The answer remains unclear, but what's obvious is that his administration's stance changes faster than flipping a pancake. One day, Zelensky is shown the door at the White House. The next day, they're shaking hands over mining profits. Today, Trump is condemning Putin, and tomorrow, he's mysteriously silent. With such unpredictable shifts, can Ukraine really trust any commitment from the US? Whether it's an economic opportunity or a geopolitical trap, Ukraine is standing at a dangerous fork in the road. And perhaps the most important question now is, who's really in control of the wheel? Is it Ukraine, or is there a hidden force steering the ship from afar?